While the disciples were talking, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." They were startled and terrified and thought that they were seeing a ghost. He said to them, "Why are you frightened? And why do doubts arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet. See that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a ghost does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have." And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. While in their joy they were disbelieving and still wondering, he said to them, "Have you anything here to eat?" They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate in their presence. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Every time I read this particular text, I think about the first confirmation class I taught at my last church, Madison Avenue in New York. The class was a combination of 8th and 9th graders. It was almost entirely boys, and so I know that this will shock you. They ate a lot. You see, we served lunch before every class so that we had some time to get to know one another and relax and laugh together after worship ended before the class officially started. It was a challenge some weeks to make sure we actually had enough food. There was only one exception to this. One week, because of a mistake that had been made with the food order for our day school, we had a menu item that had not previously ever been served to our confirmands at church. Fish sticks. Let me put it this way. The fish sticks were not a hit. My 8th and 9th graders chose to go hungry rather than eat fish sticks or even anything that had been sitting on the same serving tray as the fish sticks. And so when Jesus asks for something to eat and the disciples give him fish, I can't help but think of that class. Now, given what we've been talking about for nearly a month now, the story in some ways should come as no surprise to us. Maybe not the fish specifically, but the fact that Jesus eats. The way the Gospels tell it, the way that we've been talking about it all this time together, Jesus basically eats his way through his ministry. And so if he spends his life eating, well, why shouldn't he spend his resurrected life eating too? The details, I'll admit, are a little strange. Jesus comes to his anxious disciples and offers them peace. He calms their fears, he shows them his hands and his feet, and then he, the one who has always offered the meal, the one who has always been the provider, the one who made water turn into wine and breadcrumbs turn into a feast, he asks them for something to eat. Ben Witherington and Amy Jill Levine, some of the foremost scholars of the Gospels, one of them is Christian and one of them is Jewish, and together they observe that post-resurrection, the disciples continue doubting. And then in a startling non sequitur, Jesus asks them if they have anything to eat. Given the images of food, feeding, and table that permeate this gospel, the request is more than just a wish for a late-night snack. Nor does Jesus ever state that he's hungry. The food he requires is not for his own sustenance, they say. It is for the disciples' instruction. Ghosts do not eat. Neither do angels. Resurrected bodies do. Look, Jesus says, it's me. It's really me. Look at my hands and my feet, and look, watch me eat. You remember how often we ate together, right? I still need to eat. We still need to eat. Look, he says, it is I myself. Death has lost its power to destroy. Come and sit by me once again. Fred Craddock was a preacher with a particular gift for storytelling. One of his most memorable stories is about how he and his sisters would pass the small-town summers playing games together. One of his favorite games as a child was hide and seek. Fred loved this game because he was a rather small man and an even smaller child, and that gave him a considerable advantage when it was time to hide. He could hide in places his sisters didn't even know were places. One day he crawled under the front steps. He got under the very bottom step, right up under the porch. His sisters were running up and down those stairs over and over again, looking for him, but he was perfectly hidden. It was dark, and he was entirely out of sight. He thought to himself, "They will never find me. They will never find me. They are never going to find me." And then it dawned on him, they are never going to find me. And so he stuck a toe out from the step, and one of his sisters screamed, "I found you." Even in that game, we may think what we want is to hide, but what we really want is to be found. Resurrection and this meal that Jesus eats promises us that this much is true. We are found forever. Christ's table reassures us every time, you do not need to hide. There is a place for you here. Come and eat. You see, the way that God made the world, and the way that Jesus understands the world, and the way that we are called to live in the world, food is about nutrition, but it's never just about nutrition. And clothes are about our wardrobe, but never just about our wardrobe. And stewardship is about money and generosity, but it's never just about money and generosity. With Jesus, things are always about more than they seem. I'm convinced that all of these table stories, even the ones that challenge us, are ultimately about love. Today's story is the very last story of Jesus sharing a meal. And with this particular meal, he promises that resurrection makes sure we are never left behind. "Look at me. It is I myself," he says. "This is not a trick. This is me just as you have always known me. And at the same time, it's me different than you've ever known me." And so he asks, "Do you have anything to eat?" I can't imagine that they could eat with him and not remember all the other times they had eaten with him. The last time was in that upper room, bread that he broke and the cup that he poured. He told them this world would break his body, but not his love, and that's what they were seeing. There was that meal at Levi's house. Levi was a tax collector. Do you remember him? It was there that Jesus showed his followers that he would not treat unrighteous people the way we do. We tend to keep our distance, but not Jesus. Jesus always goes straight to wherever the brokenness is. There was the feeding of the 5,000, where the disciples looked around at the crowd and wanted to send them away. Them is a lonely word. And Jesus couldn't do it because to him they were never them. They are always us. He visited Mary and Martha. You remember their story, don't you? They each approached Jesus' visit and meal preparations differently, reminding us that sometimes, particularly when the world is falling apart, we really need to stop and listen to Jesus. And then there was his meal with Zacchaeus, the wee little man. After that meal, Zacchaeus spent every day practicing his faith. He took care of the poor, he was fair in his work, and he trusted that someday salvation would come. An awful lot happened at that table. An awful lot happens every time Jesus comes to the table, every time we come to the table and meet him there. What Jesus reveals at the table is how life is to be lived. At the table, you see, we see the world as it is, but we also see the world as the power of God's love will make it. When Jesus is at the table with us, what we're tasting is our future. At his table, relationship is claimed, friendship is practiced, grace is served, forgiveness is sampled. At his table, our very best selves are called forth. Our best selves as individuals and as a church. Here's part of what I'm trying to say. Resurrection is not just life that does not end. That actually wouldn't be very good news at all, because life is hard. And if we were put in a position to continue repeating the hard and the challenging and the heartbreaking day after day forever, that would not be good news. Resurrection is not life that does not end. Resurrection is life that is redeemed, life that is transformed. It's when we finally become exactly the way God has always intended for us to be. I've been thinking a lot about time and history these days. I suspect a lot of us have been. What happens to us, I think, is that we spend our entire lives becoming who we are. We spend a lifetime becoming ourself. Here's a little bit of what I mean by that. When I was 10 years old, I loved reading. I loved it so much, I really didn't want to do anything else. Birthdays and Christmases were full of books and more books and probably some clothes and socks and other necessities, but I didn't care about any of that. I just wanted to read. By the time I was 15, that had changed. I still loved to read, but in high school I had discovered field hockey. I woke early in the morning to run a few miles before school every day. I stayed after school for practice every day, and every night before bed, much to the chagrin of my parents, I went into our basement and ran through even more drills. When I thought about college, I wanted to go to a good school, but I also wanted to play hockey while I was there. When I was 20, I was in college. I was majoring in creative writing and I was playing field hockey, but then I broke my ankle and I missed most of the season my junior year, and I discovered that there was this whole other host of activities that go on at college if you weren't spending most of your time in the athletic department. I had written for the school newspaper, but with more time on my hands, I was invited to edit the paper. When my senior year rolled around, I didn't go back to playing hockey anymore. It didn't matter to me nearly as much as it once had. And it was in those last years of college that I wandered into a Presbyterian church for the first time. Now here's the truth. There are still traces of that 10-year-old and that 15-year-old and that 20-year-old in me. They're a little harder to find these days, but they're there. I turned 40 this year. I don't know how it happened, but it did. I turned 40 and I still love reading. But now I realize that no matter how many books I read, I'm never going to read everything I want to before I die. And I still run, but mainly in circles around my dining room table, chasing a misbehaving puppy. I spend more time in church each week now than I did in an entire year of my childhood. Not long ago, I walked down busy New York streets, and now I melt in the South Carolina sun, and both of those are a long cry from my Midwest roots. If at the age of 10 or 15 or 20, you would have told me very much about who I am now, it would have been almost impossible for me to believe it. The mystery is that I am both at the same time. I am and I am not the 10-year-old who could never take her nose out of the book. I am that kid, and I'm not that kid. I think that process of becoming who we are, it's not complete until our own resurrection. We are never finished becoming, not one of us. It's true for me, and it's true for you, and perhaps just as importantly, or even more importantly, it's true for us as a church. It's true for Shandon Presbyterian Church in Columbia, South Carolina, and it is true for Second Presbyterian Church in Roanoke, Virginia, and it is true anywhere and everywhere that Christ's disciples gather. We are who we are, and we are still a work in progress. And that, I have to tell you, that is incredibly hopeful and exciting to me. Church, who do you want to be? It's a wide open question with endless answers. The world around us, it is changing fast. And these days, they are so hard for so many reasons. But they are also ripe with opportunity. This is a moment when we actually have to ask ourselves, who do we want to be? The way Jesus phrases that question in this story is by saying, do you have anything to eat? So here's what I know in the end. Every time we gather around his table, our communion tables, our dining room tables, our coffee tables, our TV tables, every time we gather around a table, Jesus is there too. And grace is served, and hope is known, and we get a taste of our future. I don't know what the future is going to look like, but I trust that it's going to be absolutely delicious, even if you don't like fish.